At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI garbage. What's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it that way. I'm Daniel Pierce, and I'm going to be your narrator. Now, let's begin. The bridge of the Flying Brick smelled of three things: stale coffee, the acrid scent of burnt plastic from a shortening console Mickey swore he had fixed last week, and the low-grade anxiety of a captain who threaded a 10,000-ton ore hauler through a cosmic needle. Captain Maggie Taggart, her face a roadmap of hard miles and long nights, took a long drag from her stem stick. The nicotine and caffeine surged through her, a familiar, comforting punch to her heart. She exhaled a cloud of synthetic smoke and watched the holographic display where jagged, tumbling mountains of rock and ice known as the Dragon's Teeth filled the blackness between worlds. This routine run in the asteroid belt carried a 50% chance of death. "Trajectory looks stable, you old bitch," she muttered to her ship, her voice a low hum that matched the engines. "Just keep it together for another 12 hours. A sharp, defiant voice cut through the relative quiet. "I'm not a child, Mom." Mag's eyes flicked to the bridge's corner. Her daughter, Talia, stood with arms crossed, her jaws set in a perfect mirror of Mag's own stubbornness. Talia should have been 100,000 kilometers away at her new engineering apprenticeship on Ceres. Instead, she was here, a stowaway. Really? Mag shot back, her hands steady on the controls. "Because last I checked, children are the ones who sneak into dangerous industrial vehicles and hide in supply closets until turning back is a fantasy. So stop acting like one. You think this is a game? You should be in your apprenticeship, not wasting your talent hacking station cargo manifest and running illegal grav sled races in the service tunnels." "I was helping you. I rerouted the Ganymede shipment manifest so you could get the bonus priority fee," Talia retorted, her voice rising. "And the grav sled thing was for charity." "The only charity you supported was the Bell Bondsman Retirement Fund. This life, this grind," Mag gestured at the worn-out bridge, the flickering lights, the endless dark outside the viewport, "is what I work to keep you from. And you just keep running right back into it." "Because it's my life, too." Their argument, a familiar and well-rehearsed battle, fell silent. Every screen on the bridge, from the main display to Talia's personal datapad, flickered and changed. The chaos of the Dragon's Teeth vanished, replaced by a stark, pearlescent white background. A figure materialized in the center. The being stood tall and unnervingly slender, clad in a silver-white uniform that seemed to swallow the light, its edges soft and indistinct. Its face was serene, its beauty elegant and unnerving. The alien spoke, its voice a calm, melodic chime that carried an undercurrent of absolute authority. "Beings of the system you call Soul, by the authority of the Axiom Dominion, this territory is now under all protection and stewardship. Your independent governments are hereby dissolved. Your military assets will stand down. Your commercial traffic will halt and await inspection. Compliance will be rewarded. Resistance is illogical. We bring order. We bring enlightenment. The annexation is effective immediately." The message looped. Mag and Talia stared, frozen. The sheer arrogance of it was breathtaking. The message came as a statement, a fact, a simple announcement of the time, with none of the weight of a threat. A proximity alarm blared, a screeching klaxon that shattered the stunned silence. Outside the main viewport, space warped. A tear of otherworldly colors opened and closed. Where empty black once reigned, a ship now hung. An Axiom patrol cutter appeared, sleek and sharp as a silver of a polished jet. Energy fields wavered around, distorting the stars behind them like heat haze. The vessel was unnervingly clean, unnervingly advanced, and it materialized directly in Mag's pre-calculated unchangeable flight path. It sat there, stationary, a silent demand for her to halt. A channel opened, unrequested. The voice of an Axiom commander, thick with condescension, filled the bridge. Industrial Vessel 812 Flying Brick. You will power down your primary drive and prepare for inspection. Do not deviate. Comply. Mag looked at her nav chart, where her trajectory was a committed green line. Her course was locked. The massive fusion engines of the Flying Brick took hours to safely power down and minutes to alter their vector, especially in a gravity well as chaotic as the dragon's teeth. The Axiom commander, in his infinite wisdom, had parked his pristine warship in front of a 10,000-ton bullet and told it to stop on a dime. The idea that the freighter might accelerate was a variable outside his calculations. Dahlia's voice was a panicked whisper. "Mom, what are you doing?" Mag said nothing. She took one last drag from her stem stick, the cherry-red tip glowing in the bridge's gloom. She looked at her daughter, her expression hardened into cold fury. She looked at the arrogant little warship that sat in her way. Then she keyed the comms, her voice a low, dangerous growl of pure belt-rat venom. "You declared war on Earth? Congratulations. You just signed your own death warrant." She paused, the words hanging in the space between them. "And sweetheart, you're blocking my lane." Her hand slammed down on the throttle override and pushed the engines from cruise to full burn. The old ship roared in protest, the frame groaning as thousands of tons of iron ore and raw momentum received a final furious shove. On the Axiom cutter, the commander's perfectly composed eyes widened for a fraction of a second, revealing a raw disbelief. It was the last emotion he felt. The Flying Brick did more than hit the Axiom ship. It swallowed it. High-tech kinetic barriers flared and died against the brute force physics of a small moon at flank speed. The sleek hull crumpled like foil. 10,000 tons of iron and indignation smashed through polished corridors and advanced reactors and shattered the beautiful ship like a porcelain vase under a sledgehammer. The war for the Sol system began with a simple, brutal, and deeply personal act of galactic road rage. Aboard the Axiom flagship, the Axiom of Truth, Prefect Orso watched the icon for Patrol Cutter Vigilance 9 vanish into a cloud of red static. The bridge was a temple of silent function. Crew members in immaculate silver uniforms moved without wasted motion, their tasks interlocking seamlessly. The air was cool, sterile, and smelled of absolutely nothing, the clinical scent of supreme confidence. A sub-commander, his spine locked and his posture unyielding, approached from Orso's side. He remained silent until Orso gave a slight nod. "Prefect," the sub-commander reported, his voice a measured monotone. "The initial analysis of the system's logistical network is complete. While the formal military is negligible, as predicted, the civilian presence in the primary asteroid belt is extensive." Orso remained focused on the grand holographic star map that dominated the bridge's center. "Define extensive. Over 300,000 registered industrial-class vessels, Prefect. Haulers, mining platforms, salvage rigs. Their combined total mass and potential engine capacity dwarf that of our expeditionary fleet." Orso let the silence stretch, a finely honed tool he used to allow his subordinates' foolish anxieties to wither. Finally, he turned, his gaze sweeping over the sub-commander with mild disinterest. "They are cargo animals," Orso stated, his voice as cold as the interstellar dark. "Mules, shuttling dirt and ice from one rock to another. Their ships are crude, inefficient, and possess no tactical application. One disregards the panic of the herd when hunting the wolf." He gestured dismissively at the map. Their presence is an inconvenience, a logistical clutter to be swept aside. The loss of Vigilance 9 was an anomaly, the result of a local's panicked suicidal spasm. It means nothing. The subcommander bowed his head, a brief hint of doubt in his eyes quickly suppressed. Yes, Prefect. Proceed with Phase 1, Orso ordered and turned back to the map. Establish a blockade of the primary jump gates and secure the major colonial hubs. The locals will fold once the supply lines are severed. The outcome is logical and inevitable. The act of supreme cultural arrogance was his death sentence, and he was the one who signed it. The adrenaline that flooded Mag's system evaporated, leaving behind a cold residue of reality. She had just destroyed a military vessel of an interstellar empire. She was a dead woman. Her hands, usually rock steady, trembled slightly as she fought to stabilize the flying brick. The ship wounded, groaned, and bled atmosphere from a dozen minor breaches, but the old bitch still lived. She knew the official Earth and Martian navies were weeks away, tied up with maneuvers near the Kuiper Belt. They amounted to a glorified Coast Guard, unequal to the task of repelling an invasion. No one was coming to save them. With a deep, shuddering breath, she bypassed the standard comms channel, now flooded with the Axiom's looping speech, and opened a private, heavily encrypted frequency. The hauler's net. This chaotic digital space used by truckers, miners, and salvagers to trade contraband, warn about corporate patrols, and share gossip was now a torrent of pure panic. She saw frantic messages, surrender plans, desperate calls for help. She filtered through the noise, her fingers finding the direct link to a salvage rig she knew well, the Tinker's Dam. She told its captain, Mickey Virgil, exactly what she had done. She offered no embellishment or justification. She just stated the facts, her voice flat and hollow. A long pause followed on the other end. Silence so profound she thought the connection had dropped. Then, a wild, manic cackle crackled back through the speaker, a sound of pure, unrestrained glee. "Ha! Yes! Took you long enough, Mag." Mickey's voice was a high-speed collision of excitement and genius. The faint scratching of a stylus on a datapad was audible. "And they parked in your lane. Oh, that's rich. Don't you worry, I've got some ideas. Horrible, beautiful ideas that defy physics. Just give me an hour and maybe find me a whole lot of industrial-grade capacitors, huh?" That laugh, that instant, joyful acceptance of the insane planted the first tiny seed of defiance in the cold vacuum of Mag's fear. The mad giggle of a lunatic at the end of the world became the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. In a cramped, chaotic comm station tucked into a forgotten service corridor of Ceres, shortwave Lassie Wickerson lived for moments like this. Her station, the Static Nest, was a claustrophobic tangle of glowing screens, jury-rigged consoles, and cables that looked like a nest woven by a cybernetic bird. Lassie, with her neon-pink hair and a smirk that could cut glass, saw the Axiom system-wide broadcast not as an act of conquest, but as an insult to her professional pride. She watched their arrogant victory speech loop on a dozen screens. She analyzed its signal procedure, its encryption, or rather its complete lack. The broadcast on an open channel, utterly confident no one could or would dare interfere. "Amateurs," she muttered, her fingers already dancing across a custom-built console, keying in override commands and rerouting data streams. "They think we were just all going to change the channel? Good thing Ceres Core never bothered changing the admin passwords and the comms relays I installed for them." Lassie's smirk widened into a predatory grin. "Let's see how their pristine little network handles a real power surge." With a few keystrokes, she rerouted the primary power feeds from 3 nearby orbital refineries and diverted a tidal wave of energy directly into her broadcast array. The lights in her nest dimmed for a second as the capacitors whined, charging to a level that would have vaporized standard equipment. Her array, a monstrosity of stolen parts, held firm. She took aim at the Axiom's broadcast signal and fired. Her own signal, boosted by the power of 3 industrial facilities, bulldozed the Axiom transmission. It kicked the door in, threw the announcer out of the window, and put its feet up on the table. Across the entire asteroid belt, the serene, melodic voice of the Axiom Conqueror cut off abruptly, replaced by the iconic, deafening opening guitar riff of AC/DC's Thunderstruck. Lassie leaned into her own microphone, her voice a shot of pure adrenaline into the system's heart. "This is Shortwave Lassie with a traffic update for our new guest. Looks like there's been a little fender bender out in the Dragon's Teeth." She patched in the audio from Mac's final, defiant transmission. "Sweetheart, you're blocking my lane." The sound of impact, a deep, grinding cataclysm, echoed after the words. "The belt ain't yours." Lassie snarled into the mic, her voice a beacon of defiance in the darkness. "You wanted a war. You got one. Now get ready for a traffic jam from hell." Anchored to the dark side of a massive nickel-iron asteroid belt designated BA-447, Big Gus Navarro listened to Lassie's broadcast echo in the cramped cockpit of his mining tech, the Widowmaker. The music was loud, obnoxious, and utterly glorious. The message was as clear as a laser drill. Gus was a man built like the asteroids he cracked to live, solid, without yield, and older than he looked. The belt was his home. It was his church, his office, and his sanctuary. The Axiom were trespassers, not conquerors. They were kids who spray-painted graffiti on his cathedral wall. He looked down at the mech's massive hydraulic claws, each finger thicker than his torso, designed to rip open the rocky crust of an asteroid. He looked at the high-intensity plasma drill on the opposite arm, a tool that could melt through solid rock in seconds. He looked out the reinforced cockpit window at the distant lights of the Axiom ships, which shone so clean and fragile against the rugged landscape of his home. Without a word, he cracked his knuckles, a sound like stones grinding. With a series of deliberate, familiar movements, he rerouted the primary power conduits one by one, pulling from his mech's non-essential systems, including life support, directly into the drill's capacitors. This one-way trip charged the weapon far beyond its safety limits. Gus Navarro never backed down. His goal was brutally simple: evict the trespassers, violently. The junkyard was a place of legend in the belt. A hollowed-out asteroid that spun in space served as the system's largest salvage yard, black market, and emergency hideout. Following encrypted instructions from Mac over the hauler's net, a strange armada converged there. The sight was breathtakingly ugly. A swarm of bulky freighters, nimble salvage tugs, heavily armored mining rigs, and patched-together courier ships. Although none were warships, their pilots were all royally, cosmically pissed off. Mag found herself the de facto leader, not by choice, but because she'd thrown the first punch. She, Mickey, Lassie, who had rerouted her entire comm station to a mobile rig and blasted her way to them, and a newly arrived Gus formed an impromptu command council in the smoky back room of a cantina built into the asteroid's wall. The mood was a volatile cocktail of terror, grief for the first confirmed losses, and a defiant, white-hot fury that burned brighter than any fusion drive. "They're faster. They have better weapons, and they have shields that can stop a railgun slug," a grizzled hauler captain named Brissa said, her voice grim. "Who do we have?" Mickey vibrated with manic energy and slapped a datapad down on the table. It showed a schematic of a standard belter mining mech. "We have this," he said with a grin. "Gus's rig, the Widowmaker, has more armor plating than one of their destroyers. They have emergency cocktail gel seals that can hold against a vacuum for an hour." Lassie leaned back in her chair, a sly look in her face. "And they don't know our turf. We know every shortcut, every dead sensor zone, every unstable rock cluster from here to Jupiter. They have maps. We have muscle memory." Mag looked at the faces around the table, the worried, angry, resolute eyes of her people. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and out-teched, but they were on their home turf, and they had nothing left to lose. "All right," Mag said, her voice cutting through the noise. Let's go show 'em how to handle tailgaters in the belt. Mickey's cavernous salvage bay aboard the Tinker's Dam, now docked inside the junkyard, became the fleet's R&D department, armory, and mad science laboratory. The air was thick with the scent of welding, superheated metal, and vaporized coolant. Mickey, in his helmet, directed a chaotic symphony of improvisation. "Oh no, weld the plasma cutter to the cargo arm, not the sensor boom. We need to aim it," he yelled at a crew of mechanics. He and his team worked feverishly. They bolted high-intensity mining lasers into freighter cargo cranes. They rigged magnetic ore grapples to seize and hurl 20-ton chunks of iron-rich asteroid as kinetic slugs. Talia refused to be sidelined and found her place in the chaos. Her eye for grav-sled dynamics translated surprisingly well into an ability to identify structural weak points in Axiom ship designs pulled from fragmented sensor data. She worked alongside Mickey, her defiance toward her mother now channeled into the work, a bright, angry creativity. "And check this," Mickey announced and pointed at the mining mech schematic again. "These things have emergency cockpit gel seals for hull breaches and a last breath O2 injector wired straight to the harness. But the best part," he highlighted a series of nodes around the cockpit assembly. "The whole cockpit is rigged with explosive bolts. If the reactor goes critical, it blows the pilot clear. It's more than a mech. It's the universe's angriest escape pod." Later, Mickey unveiled the pet project and held up a small survey probe. "We've got hundreds of these scattered across the belt." A skeptical pilot scoffed. "They're glorified sensor packages, Mickey. You gonna annoy them to death with geological data?" Mickey's grin was positively feral. "We pack 'em with scavenge blasting charges. But the real trick," he said as he held up a small microchip, "is the guidance system. Remember that mod we developed to chase down those rogue comets last year? The one CorpSec tried to ban because its tracking algorithms were unethically aggressive? Turns out it's pretty damn good to lock onto Axiom energy signatures if you overclock the primary capacitor." As if on cue, a flash of brown and white fur zipped past. A zero-G raccoon in a tiny harness labeled zip tie scurried up a pile of scrap metal. A shiny, oversized capacitor was clutched to his tiny hands. "Zip tie, you little bastard! Bring that thing back!" Mickey yelled as he chased after his pet. The raccoon chittered, dodged his grab, scurried up a conduit, and dropped the capacitor into a parts bin right next to the probe. Mickey stopped, stared at the capacitor, then at the probe, then back at the capacitor. The capacitor was a perfect fit. He looked up at the raccoon, who now groomed itself, utterly indifferent. "Oh, zip tie," Mickey said with reverence. "You're a damn genius." The Axiom dispatched a scout squadron, 3 sleek, deadly cutters, to investigate the communications anomaly and the mysterious loss of Vigilance 9. They expected to find wreckage. They found the belt bastards waiting for them. The trap was as elegant as it was ugly. As the Axiom squadron entered the defense field of scrap metal, a dozen freighters powered up their magnetic grapples. A cloud of rusted plating, dead engine blocks, and small asteroids were hurled at the scouts. It was less a weapon and more a storm. The Axiom ships, forced to raise their kinetic barriers, were instantly blinded, their advanced sensors overwhelmed. Simultaneously, Lassie Wickerson worked her magic. From her mobile comms rig, she flooded the Axiom targeting systems with thousands of phantom signals, ghost signatures that flickered in and out of existence. The Axiom command screens became a useless blizzard of false positives. Into this confusion strode a monster. From the shadow of a colossal asteroid, Gus Navarro's Widowmaker emerged. It was no longer a mining mech. It was a titan of vengeance. He ambushed the lead cutter, his mech's powerful legs magnetized to the asteroid's surface. He fired no missile. He reached out with his overcharged plasma drill and sliced the warship's engine block clean open. The resulting explosion was a silent, blossoming flower of pure energy that vaporized the lead ship and fatally wounded the second. The third cutter, its commander horrified by the sheer barbarism of the attack, attempted to flee. It failed. Mag, at the helm of a patched-up flying brick, bore down on it. She had no weapons. What she had was a very large cargo crane, with a skill born from decades of loading ore. She swung a 20-ton container of tungsten rods directly into the Axiom ship's bridge. The impact was catastrophic. The Axiom squadron was annihilated. Their last panic transmission, logged by Lassie for posterity, was a confused report about savages throwing rocks and screaming, "They are not logical." As the bastards celebrated, a small salvage tug from Lassie's crew already crawled over the wreckage of the third cutter. "Got it!" A voice crackled over the private channel. "Comms module's intact." Lassie grinned, a shark seeing blood in the water.
"Bring that ugly little box to me. Let's see what secrets it tells."
On the immaculate bridge of the Axiom of Truth, Prefect Orso reviewed the Scout Squadron's final fragmented sensor data. He felt no sense of threat. He felt a profound, deep-seated disgust. The human tactics weren't clever. They were the death throes of a lesser culture. It was like watching apes fling feces at a work of art. He dismissed the failure utterly. The locals had gotten lucky. He would make that mistake just once. He dispatched a heavily armed convoy, 2 full cruisers, a half-dozen destroyers, and a small fighter carrier. Their orders were simple and clinical. Proceed down the main asteroid belt shipping lanes and systematically destroy any vessel that failed to surrender immediately. He saw it as a simple pest control operation. Lassie Wickerson's fingers flew across her console. She had piggybacked a sensor tap onto the Axiom's long-range comms network. A risky move, but it paid off. Orso's orders flashed across her screen. A full convoy, 2 cruisers. They were outgunned 20-1. Mag gathered the council in the junkyard cantina. The mood was grim. Looking at the star chart spread across the holographic table, Mag's eyes settled on a particularly dense, unstable asteroid cluster. A place marked on all official charts with a skull and crossbones icon and a simple name, the Grinder. "Here," Mag said, her finger tapping the ominous zone. "We fight 'em here. We can't outgun 'em, so we let the rocks do the fighting for us." Lassie nodded, a confident smirk on her face.
"And thanks to the comms module we snagged, I've cracked their battlenet. Their encryption is all hardware-based. Arrogant. Now that I have a key, I own their internal comms."
The plan was a high-risk, high-reward gambit. It would rely on perfect timing, suicidal courage, and a whole lot of Mickey's newly christened harpoon missiles. As the fleet prepped for battle, the tension between Mag and Talia finally reached its breaking point. Mag found her daughter in a shuttle bay as she ran diagnostics on a fast, nimble survey craft. "You'll stay behind," Mag ordered, her voice leaving no room for argument. "You'll be on the medical support vessel." Talia spun around, her face tight with fury.
"No!
"That wasn't a request."
I don't care."
Talia shoved a datapad into her mother's hands. On it were complex equations and targeting solutions.
"Those harpoon missiles? Their tracking is good, but it's based on predictable movement. Axiom fighters are agile. I modified the guidance algorithm with predictive models from grav-sled racing physics. It'll increase their accuracy against moving targets by at least 30%.
Mag stared at the data, stunned by its elegance.
"I'm not a child to be protected,"
Talia said, her voice shaking but firm, her eyes burning with a fire Mag recognized as her own.
"You taught me to never back down. Don't dare ask me to start now."
As they stood in the charged silence, Zip-Tie, the raccoon, having escaped his cage again, darted towards an open ventilation shaft. Mag let out an exasperated yell, but Talia, without breaking eye contact with her mother, simply knelt and held out a small piece of dried fruit from her pocket. The raccoon stopped, considered, and trotted over to take the treat. In that moment of calm problem-solving, Mag saw not her little girl, but a capable, resolute woman, a warrior. She let out a long, slow breath, a mix of terror and pride churning in her gut. "Fine." Mag relented, her voice strained. "You'll pilot that survey shuttle. We'll call it the Wasp. You run interference. You draw their fire. Do not engage. Understood? Talia nodded, a small, triumphant smile touching her lips.
Understood, Captain.
The battle began in a cacophony of rock and roll. The Axiom convoy, arrogant and self-assured, entered the grinder in a perfect, disciplined spearhead. Their sensors were immediately overwhelmed by the sheer density of the debris field and the clouds of metallic dust. Then, Lassie made her move. She found the Axiom's internal ship-to-ship comms frequency and hijacked it. The crisp, formal orders of the Axiom commanders were suddenly drowned out by the bone-rattling, defiant scream of "Highway to Hell." The Axiom were disoriented not by the noise, but by the sheer cultural vandalism of it. As the first guitar riff shrieked through their bridges, the belt-bastard ships emerged from the shadows of looming asteroids. They were no longer just ugly freighters. Talia had organized teams of daredevils with spray cans. The ships now wore defiant, snarling graffiti, fanged skulls, shattered Axiom hulls, and a repeated stylized image of a raccoon holding a fizzing explosive. The fight was a brutal, chaotic, close-quarters brawl. Freighters, never meant for combat, became gravitational weapons. They played a deadly game of cosmic billiards, using their immense mass to nudge and shove the sleek warships off course and force them into paths of tumbling asteroids. Each such maneuver sent shudders through the freighters' hulls, a high-cost trade of structural integrity for tactical advantage. Mickey's harpoon missiles, guided by Talia's new algorithms, flew like angry hornets and slammed into hulls and shield generators with devastating effect. But the centerpiece of the battle was Gus Navarro. He latched the Widowmaker onto the hull of an Axiom cruiser. The Axiom crew watched on internal monitors in terror as the massive mining mech ripped through their pristine hull. The sudden hiss of sterile air rushing out was replaced by the stink of plasma burns and scorched metal. Gus was a demon from a lesser nightmare, his plasma torch wreaking havoc inside their sterile world as Axiom crewmen in silver-white uniforms fled in terror. Gus became the focus of the enemy's fire. His mech was shredded by concentrated energy lances, its thick armor glowing cherry red. Alarms screamed as his cockpit breached, the air venting into space. He was wounded, a piece of shrapnel embedded in his side, his suit's emergency gel seal the only thing keeping him alive. Trapped, exposed, and with the mech dying around him, Gus used his last ounce of power for one final act of defiance. With a roar of straining hydraulics, he used the mech's claw to rip its massive, unstable fusion core from its housing. It leaked radiation and raw energy. The core pulsed like a dying star. With a final, desperate bellow, Gus used the mech's failing arms to pitch the glowing, unstable core like a fastball from hell. It sailed across the short distance and smashed through the cruiser's main viewport. As the core flew, Gus slapped the emergency ejection toggle on his console. Explosive bolts fired. The entire cockpit module shot away from the dying mech, a tiny lifeboat fleeing a sinking Titan. The fusion core detonated inside the cruiser's bridge. The resulting explosion was magnificent, a silent, expanding star that silenced the cruiser forever. From the bridges of the other bastard ships, all they saw was the flash. They believed Gus gone. A moment of grim, profound loss settled over them. The Axiom carrier, the heart of the convoy, remained protected by a screen of agile fighters.
"We need to take it out!"
Mickey yelled over the comms.
"I built a little surprise. A massive jury-rigged EMP bomb. But it needs to be delivered inside their hangar bay shields to be effective. It's a one-way trip for any ship big enough to carry it." "I'll take it,"
Mag said instantly.
No,
A clear, steady voice cut through. Talia's voice.
not for a ship small enough to get through the fighter screen.
Before Mag could scream, Talia gunned the engine of the Wasp. The small shuttle, now carrying the EMP bomb on a magnetic clamp, shot forward like a bullet. Mag watched in horror and awe as her daughter dodged and weaved through a hellstrom of enemy fire. Her skills at the stick honed in illegal tunnel races, now a weapon of war. Talia sliced through the fighter screen, jinked past the carrier's point defense turrets, and shot straight into the massive glowing energy field of the main hangar bay. She released the bomb, pulled an outrageous high-G turn that would have blacked out any lesser pilot, and blasted back out of the hangar just as the massive bay doors began to slide shut. The EMP detonated. A silent, invisible pulse of pure energy washed over the carrier and crippled it from the inside out. Lasates flickered and died. Engines sputtered into silence. The Axiom carrier, the most powerful ship in the convoy, became a dead, drifting hulk. The crippled Axiom convoy, its command ship destroyed and its carrier disabled, finally broke. The remaining ships turned and fled in disarray. The Belt Bastards had won an astounding victory. They mourned Gus, his name spoken with reverence over the comms, a new martyr for their cause. Then, a weak, crackling signal cut through the chatter. The voice was weak, laced with static and pain. "Get a medic. Think I've sprung a leak." It was Gus. A salvage tug's searchlight found his ejected cockpit module as it tumbled through space. The canopy was cracked, the hull scorched. When they brought him in, his suit was compromised and he suffered from radiation burns, his face a mess of blood and blisters. But he was alive. One eye cracked open as they pulled him from the wreckage. He gave a weak, grimacing thumbs up. The fleet's morale, having plunged to the depths of loss, soared into a wild, defiant celebration. Alone on the silent, pristine bridge of the Axiom of Truth, Prefect Orso watched the combat logs from the grinder. His aristocratic detachment was gone, shattered. He saw the graffiti-covered ships. He heard the echoes of the barbaric human music. He watched, frame by horrific frame, as the lesser mining mech tore his cruiser apart. For the first time in his career, his sterile, logical mind failed him. He had dismissed it as logical desperation, but this was something else entirely. It was coordinated, it was inventive, and most disturbingly, it was joyful in its violence. It infuriated him. It disturbed him, and in a cold, secret part of his heart he would never acknowledge, it frightened him. His decision to commit the main battle fleet was no longer a logical strategic step. It was an emotional, panicked reaction, a desperate need to erase this incomprehensible, offensive anomaly from the universe. Orso's humiliation was absolute. The loss of a full convoy to weaponized industrial equipment was an unprecedented disgrace. He was done with surgical strikes and containment. He gave the order. The full might of the Axiom Expeditionary Battle Fleet, held in reserve, was now committed to a single brutal goal. Strategy was abandoned. His goal was simple: annihilation. He would sterilize the entire asteroid belt, rock by rock, if necessary. Lassie's intercepts revealed the terrifying scale of the approaching fleet. It wasn't a convoy. It was an armada. Hundreds of warships, a tide of silver and death bearing down on them. They couldn't win a straight fight. This was the endgame. Mag gathered her council in the junkyard cantina one last time. The air was heavy. Mickey, looking more manic and sleep-deprived than ever, laid out one final desperate plan. He projected a star chart onto the table and highlighted a region of the belt even more treacherous than the grinder. A gravitationally unstable nightmare where a dozen small moonlets orbited each other in chaotic, intersecting paths. It was called the Cauldron.
"We can't fight their ships,"
Mickey said, his voice a low, intense hum.
"So, we make the rocks fight for us."
An old, grizzled miner named Sal, a friend of Gus's, spat onto the floor.
"The Cauldron chain,"
he rasped, his voice full of a terrible awe.
"You're insane, kid. We run sims on that for 50 years. It's why the whole sector's interdicted. One wrong nudge, and the whole cluster becomes a self-sustaining kinetic storm that won't stop for a century.
Mickey nodded, his eyes gleaming.
Exactly. The bomb's been sitting there waiting for someone to light the fuse. My ship, the Anvil, will be the conductor's podium. We'll fly in with the 3 bombardiers, the volunteer ships, each loaded with every explosive we possess. I'll send the synchronized detonation signal to the 3 keystones, the most unstable moonlets from the center of the storm. It's all about timing. Milliseconds.
His genius was not in the concept of the weapon, but in figuring out how to aim it. The mood across the fleet was somber. The plan required the ultimate sacrifice from 3 crews. Mag watched as the captain of the freighter Iron Duke shared a last flask of Martian whiskey with his first mate before they volunteered. A young pilot couple on the bridge of the tug Junkyard Saint held hands, their faces pale but resolute. They would pilot their ship, now a massive bomb, to the second keystone. Gus, still recovering in the medbay, gave a silent, stoic nod to Sal, who was taking his own aging mining rig, the Rockbiter, on the 3rd and final run. Before the battle, Mag opened a fleet-wide channel. Her voice was raw, stripped of its sarcasm. This is Taggart. To the crews of the Iron Duke, the Junkyard Saint, and the Rockbiter. There aren't any words, just thank you. Give 'em hell. She paused, her throat tight. The rest of you, let's make sure it's worth it. Taggart out. Lassie prepared her ultimate playlist. Mickey found Talia by the airlock of the Anvil. He gently handed her a zip-ties carrier.
Take care of the little bastard,
he said.
He's the best damn engineer I know.
Talia took the carrier, her eyes welling with tears. Mickey? He just tapped his console, a wild grin on his face.
Time to go conduct the ugliest orchestra in history. Don't scratch the records.
The final battle was joined. The belt bastards, a tiny swarm against a tidal wave of steel, acted as bait. They struck hard and fast at the edges of the Axiom Armada, then faded back into the asteroid fields and drew the fleet deeper into the cauldron. Lassie, a mad goddess of the airwaves, blasted a defiant mix of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony and Mongolian throat metal across all channels. Prefect Orso, blinded by his need for a decisive victory, took the bait. He ordered his fleet into a tight, aggressive wedge, a perfect spearhead, fatally vulnerable to the chaos to come. At the calculated heart of the cauldron, Mickey watched from the bridge of the Anvil as the 3 bombardier ships reached their marks. On his screen, the Axiom flagship, the Axiom of Truth, moved in on the closest volunteer, its main energy cannon glowing.
Showtime,
Mickey whispered and sent the signal. 3 blinding, silent flashes of light erupted from the bombardiers. 3 man-made stars. The blasts were aimed not at the fleet, but at the keystones. The shock waves hit the unstable moonlets, not with brute force, but with precisely the right energy to fracture them and nudge them into their catastrophic intersecting orbits. The Axiom of Truth, caught in the raw, unleashed energy of the closest blast, was vaporized instantly. Prefect Orso and his arrogance ceased to exist. The chain reaction began. The first collision of 2 moonlets was a harbinger, a clash of titans that sent continent-sized shards of rock screaming through the Axiom's tight arrangement of ships. Packed together, their ordered lines became a death trap. Ships crashed into each other, trying to evade the debris. Asteroids the size of cities slammed into their ranks and turned cruisers into scrap. The cauldron became a meat grinder. It wasn't a battle. It was a cosmic demolition derby orchestrated by a madman. The Axiom were the pins. As the Axiom fleet tore itself apart, Mag saw Orso's second-in-command attempting to rally the survivors from a heavily damaged battlecruiser. Aboard the flying brick, battered and bleeding atmosphere, she made one final run. She set her beloved dying ship on a collision course.
Come on, Talia,
she yelled. At the last possible second, She and Talia ejected in their armored escape pod, the small craft rocketing away from the impeding impact. As they sped away, Mag opened one final personal channel to the Axiom battlecruiser. Her message was simple, raw, and full circle. You were in our lane. The flying brick, the ship that started it all, impacted the battlecruiser, its own reactor breach delivering the final blow. The remaining Axiom fleet, broken, leaderless, and utterly terrified, finally turned and fled the system, a shattered remnant of a once proud armada. Weeks later, the official Earth Navy finally arrived in force. They found the Axiom gone and the asteroid belt littered with the monumental wreckage of an Imperial fleet. The story of the Belt Bastards had already become a legend, whispered from the red dust of Mars to the frozen methane of Kuiper Belt. Shortwave Lassie, broadcasting from a captured and heavily modified Axiom comm station, her signal now powerful enough to reach neighboring star systems, signed off on her inaugural address to the galaxy. She replayed the recordings of Mag's final transmission. You were in our lane, and let the silence hang for a moment before she added her own commentary, her voice laced with amusement and steel.
This is Shortwave Lassie, speaking for the Sol System. We're open for business. We're open for trade. But if you're thinking of starting trouble, get in line. This system is under new management.
Across the galaxy, whispers began of the strange, unpredictable species orbiting the star called Sol, the one species you never, ever cut off in traffic. In a quiet corner of a newly built station in the junkyard, Talia Taggart stood before a sprawling mural. It was a memorial, not of soldiers in uniform, but of truckers, mechanics, and pirate radio DJs. In the center, a mining mech stood triumphant on the hull of a broken warship. And perched on its shoulder, forever to watch over the lanes they fought to keep free, was the painted image of a very brave raccoon, holding a slightly oversized capacitor.